You are listening to One Nation Under Crime, a historical, chronological true crime podcast. Each week, we go through our nation's history and discuss one case from each year starting in 1800, but not this week.
Nope.
We are continuing our coverage on John C. Colt. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Leah.
And if you are a patron, welcome. We just saw you a few moments ago.
Yes, we
So
did.
welcome to your early episode. If not, you still have time to go be a patron so that you can get those great perks.
Mm-hmm.
Just go to patreon.com and search for One Nation Under Crime. You can also just scroll down on your feed right now when you're looking at your podcast. You can scroll down, and that's kind of where all of our sources are. And at the very bottom, there's a link that you can click that goes straight to our Patreon. So you can do that as well. Like I said, we are continuing our coverage on John C. Colt and the murder of Samuel Adams. Not that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same sources from last week. So I'm not going to go through those again because we already did that. But like I said, I didn't cover everything for last week as far as our history for the year. So
We got to know who was born and who bought the farm.
I got a little bit left. So we have undated events.
Undated.
For 1841.
Events.
And one of these.
How are they undated if we know they happened that year?
We just know that they happened in the year. So some interesting actually all of these I found super interesting. One of them we have covered.
Okay.
So first up, Stephen F. Whitman opened a small retail confectionery and fruitiere in Philadelphia called Whitman's. And that is the famous Whitman's company that you know today that has the Whitman sampler.
I was going to say, I like their samplers. They're good.
They are good. So our next undated, this is the one that we have covered. So P.T. Barnum.
We know him.
We do. He's going to come up again in a second too, which it's so unfortunate, but what it's related to is anyways. All right.
It's unfortunate he's coming up again.
Yes, and you'll see why. He purchased the Scudder's American Museum in New York City, and that's eventually what he pushed forward and created everything with. And then the same year, our last undated event, John Augustus developed the concept of probation in Boston, which also created bail for lesser offenders. So he created the entire system of like, here's probation. Oh, also, if you have kind of like the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony, if you have a lesser charge, then you can pay money for bail, even though like you've been convicted of your crime. So
thank you, sir.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Especially. So then we get to our births in 1841, May 10th. James Gordon Bennett Jr. He is the son of the founder of the New York Herald. We have talked about James Gordon Bennett Sr. before in our previous episodes. We've actually talked about him in 2 previous episodes. The Girl in Green and The Beautiful Scar Girl. We talked about him in both of them. He's also going to come up in this case. So,
well, I mean, if he's in charge of a paper, a big paper, then he's going to.
Well, and he's very well known in kind of like the newspaper world.
Yeah.
Like he's very well known. But his son, Bennett Jr., he organized the first polo and tennis matches in the United States, and he won the first transatlantic yacht race. Nothing like a yacht race to say you rich.
I mean,
you know.
And don't call it a boat.
No, it's a yacht, not a boat. And he is a Taurus. So October 12th. Yes.
What happened there?
Joseph O'Dwyer was born. He's an American physician who developed the system of intubation in diphtheria cases.
Huh.
And he is known as the father of laryngeal intubation in croup. So he created the system of intubation, which we should be very thankful for.
Very thankful for, but
So-
still terrified of it happening to
terrified.
me. Just
yes.
laying it out there,
Yes.
being for real. I
Mhm.
mean, very, very thankful. And if I ever have to have
Mhm.
it, I mean, it will be very beneficial, but I'm
But
terrified.
not something. He is Libra.
Hmm.
And then our deaths in 1841. We talked about this one in the last episode, and we'll talk about it here. April 4th, President William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia. He was the 9th president of the United States. Maybe linked to his extremely long speech.
Should have talked less.
You know, who knows? And then October 6th, George Campbell Childress died. He was a lawyer and politician who was the principal author of the Texas Declaration of Independence.
Oh.
Yes, very, very influential man. So we are going to hop over to our case for this week, and we're going to just continue on with where we were. January 13th of 1842, the sensational Colt-Adams Murder Trial began. But to go forward, we got to go back. And we will kind of go back to the end of last week's episode for those of you who forgot or haven't already heard it because you're a patron and you just jumped over here. So sorry if you're a patron. It won't be long. September 17th of 1841, Samuel Adams went to meet John to collect a debt due for some textbooks that Samuel had printed for him. The two had a heated argument about the final amount John owed Samuel, and a few sources, as we said before, said that it was about $1.35.
Which is not equal to $500 today.
Probably around 20. According to John, Samuel began choking him with his ascot and pressing him hard against the wall and table. Then, allegedly, in self-defense, John reached for what he thought was a hammer to fend him off.
Because those just are lying around offices.
But the weapon was not a hammer.
Nope.
But in fact, a hatchet.
A little bit of mistake.
And that was where we ended last episode.
Cliffhanger.
So let's continue.
Yeah, now let's go. Let's find out.
It's not great.
It doesn't lead up to anything pretty. It doesn't sound like to me.
No, it does not. But it's not super terrible. If that's it's not good because death, but
because death.
I'm saying the manner of everything. It's not on the scale of how triggered you should be. It's not that high.
I mean, it's not good because death.
But here we are. So John struck Samuel 4 or 5 times with the hatchet, causing Samuel to drop to the floor. That is when John realized what happened.
What had happened was
the blood kept pouring out of Samuel's head and began pooling on the floor. John was afraid that it would leak through the floorboards to the apothecary below. He began mopping up the blood
that's what you need to worry about.
He began mopping up the blood with a towel and a bucket of water that he kept in his office. While he was cleaning, there were knocks on the office door, but John ignored them and kept going. He cleaned up what he could, and then this is where we left off with his brother. He cleaned up what he could, And then he ran to the city hotel to tell his brother and gunmaker, Samuel Colt, what happened.
Oh.
John did see his brother Samuel there, but he saw that he was engaged in conversation with two men, and he left without telling him what happened.
Oh.
So he was like, I'm going to tell him, but keep in mind, Samuel Colt was there meeting with investors to invest into what becomes the Colt Manufacturing Company. And so John runs in, sees him talking to people, and just turns around and leaves. And so Samuel seeing him run in is where we left off with Samuel.
Oh my goodness. It's like, oh, I'm not going to bother him with this minor issue.
This is such a minor inconvenience. So sorry. Ooh, so sorry. I don't mean to bother you, but
oh my gosh.
This could be this could be bad. I don't know if it's bad, but it could be bad. But you know what? You know what? You're in a meeting. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. I see that you are busy at the moment, and I hate to interrupt.
I'll wait till later. This can keep.
It's not that important. It's fine.
We'll just stick a pin in it. Or a hatchet.
I actually have something I need to go take care of. So I'm gonna go do that now.
Oh my
and just
gosh.
Gone.
I mean,
John then thought, I'll go to the authorities and confess. But he decided he didn't want to submit his family to a scandal. He finally...
Too late, Goober.
He finally came up with a plan that he thought was foolproof. But
he wasn't thinking clearly.
but seeing as we are covering this case, it was in fact not foolproof.
Correct.
He disposed of anything that would identify Samuel and packed his corpse into a shipping crate with salt.
Oh.
He worked late into the night, packing the crate and cleaning the floor and the walls of the office to get rid of any signs of what happened earlier. He addressed the crate to a non-existent address in New Orleans, and he hired a carman. It's one word, but it's their word for like a courier.
Gotcha.
But it is, I know it sounds weird to say carman, but it is one word. It's very weird. I had to make sure. I was like, did they mean carman? Okay. Anyways, and his name was Barstow, to deliver the crate to a ship. Leah's going to like the name of the ship. The Kalamazoo.
Ooh, that is fun.
And the Kalamazoo was scheduled to leave the next morning.
Ooh, is that why, like in cartoons and stuff, they say, going to ship you to Kalamazoo? Is that why they say that now?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really?
Yeah.
That makes me happy.
That is one part of it. So
look at me.
He then decided to go and dump the bloody water into the gutter outside, and then he left the office. He stopped at a bathhouse to clean himself and his clothes before returning home. And when he arrived, he told Caroline that he was late because he met a friend in town from Philadelphia. So, after about a day or so, Samuel Adams' family began searching the city for him. They published.
He didn't come home.
I mean, where'd he go? They published notices in several newspapers, such as the New York Courier and Enquirer and the New York Weekly Tribune, notifying people that he was missing. A neighbor of John's at the shop named Asa Wheeler told Samuel's father-in-law that he had heard noises in John's office that sounded like a fight followed by a crash to the floor. Asa went and peered into the keyhole where he saw someone, quote, bending over something on the floor. Asa knocked on the door several times, but John would not come to the door. So he was the one knocking. Asa later borrowed a key from the landlord and went into the office. He saw that a large packing crate was missing and that the floor had been recently cleaned.
How did he know that a packing crate was missing?
I don't know. That I couldn't tell you.
I was just curious.
On September 22nd, which was 5 days later, John visited Samuel's print shop inquiring about the status of his books, but he also kind of wanted to know where Samuel was at. Samuel's bookbinder, Charles Wells, told John that the last time Samuel had been seen was actually when he was on his way to visit John. Weird. I put not sketchy at all. Samuel's father-in-law, Asa Wheeler, and another employee of Samuel's examined the ledgers for any transactions involving John C. Colt, and then went to the mayor of New York City with what they had found. Other witnesses said that Samuel was last seen entering John's office on September 17th, and that John had a crate delivered by a carman the next day.
So that's how he knew it was missing, because it had been delivered, then gone.
The mayor, no.
No.
So Barstow, the carman, came to the office to pick up the crate to take it.
Gotcha.
The mayor asked the superintendent of carts, which is like who's over the car men.
Gotcha.
Car people? I don't know.
It would have been men, most likely, yeah.
But the superintendent of carts, William Godfrey, to locate the carman in question and determine the location of the crate. Godfrey found Barstow, who told him that he delivered it to the freighter Kalamazoo that was set to leave. Well, it just so happened
had not left yet,
that the Kalamazoo was still in port because it was delayed by a storm from sailing.
Oh, no.
This crate had been in that ship for 5 days.
Oh, no.
The New York police, accompanied by the city's mayor and the carman, boarded the ship and asked if the crate was still in the cargo hold. The decomposing body had already started emitting a strong odor, which the ship hands assumed was just poison put out to kill rats.
Ugh.
They opened the crate and revealed a half-clothed male corpse wrapped in a shop awning, bound with rope and packed with salt. A scar on the man's leg and a single gold ring identified the body as Samuel Adams.
Oh, no.
John made a full confession when he was approached by the police on September 23rd and was arrested for the murder of Samuel Adams and sent to the New York City jail known as the Tombs.
Oh, we talked about that place.
I told y'all that we would cover John Colt and that he was there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So he was sent to the Tombs. When authorities looked through John's possessions, they found Samuel's gold pocket watch with an image of the U.S. Capitol engraved on it.
Why did he keep that?
The trial officially began on January 13th of 1842 in what came to be known as the Colt-Adams Murder Trial, and it essentially dominated newspaper headlines at the time. There was only one other event that received as much publicity, and that was the murder of Mary Cecilia Rogers. So these cases were going on at the same time.
I gotcha.
So if it wasn't John Colt, it was Mary Rogers, like on the cover of the newspaper. There is something that is known as a trial by media.
Yes.
And this is a very good example of that sentiment. So, for those who do not know what a trial by media is, it is unfortunate that this occurs, but it's still, and there's actually a Netflix series that is called Trial by Media that goes through famous cases that the media has been blamed almost inadvertently for the misinformation and then the further like prosecution of the person. Guess who is in that series?
Who?
Richard Scrushy.
Oh.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, he was like the owner, the founder of Health South and scammed a bunch of people out of money.
His sister taught at my elementary school and taught me at our college.
We know someone whose parents, I think, still own one of his old houses.
Really?
Yes. So it's very interesting. True Crime Obsessed covered that series, and they started, all of a sudden my ears perked up because they were like, we got to talk about this garbage, Richard Scrushy. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, it was just so, one, I had not heard that name in so long.
Right.
And then two, I was like,
what?
That's here.
That's hometown.
That's here. Like
that is our county. That is,
and it was
not
funny.
Just our state, but our county. That is here.
I know, it was so crazy. But for those who don't know, kind of what a trial by media is that essentially the entire case is tried in what is called. I'm doing all of this from memory, guys. So if I get something wrong, I'm sorry. But everything is tried in what is known as the public court of opinion. And the public court of opinion is essentially all this news is coming out and the public is deciding themselves whether this person is innocent or guilty simply based off of the media that they are receiving, not necessarily by the trial. So that's what they kind of call it, is a trial by media, because the court of public opinion is kind of what sways one case one way or another.
And especially if you have a closed courtroom, you don't have all of the information.
Well, and the trial by media most commonly occurs before the trial even happens.
Yes.
One very, I'll say, I can't think of the word right now, controversial case that this happened in is the Scott and Lacey Peterson.
I thought about that, and I thought about and it just left my mind.
OJ.
I thought of that one, and then Casey Anthony.
Oh, don't get me started.
Well, see,
yeah. Well, hers was.
Well, I mean, and
yeah,
I know
hers was. She had an attorney, Jose Baez, garbage, who said some things to try and sway some things away from her. Anyways,
but I mean,
but yes,
those are examples even before the trial,
right?
People.
Well, and her trial was pushed off for a while. OJ was also one that the court of public opinion was very large on. And if you remember, that jury was sequestered for like over a year, which, guys, being sequestered means you're in a hotel room with no access to TV, no access to family members. You can make phone calls, but it's such a serious trial that you can't be subjected to the media. So you're sequestered, which is a theory as to why he was named not guilty, was because they were tired of being sequestered and they were ready to get out. But Scott and Lacey Peterson trial is a very, very good example of this. One, because the official having a dedicated 24-hour news network started right at the time that this case came along. And it was also when Facebook came out.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of different things that were influencing this case. And so they could not, it was so hard for them to find a jury that had not heard about the case
Yeah.
that it basically came down to, if do you believe in the death penalty, and can you apply those principles to a case? Like, that's what they had to come down to, instead of like, have you heard of this case? They couldn't even do that. It had
Because
to
everybody
be
had.
like, can you apply the law to this? That was what the jury came down to.
And
But
there are a lot of local cases everywhere that
mhm,
you can do that, but those are just some
those
national
are some like
cases.
national, yeah, that a lot of people know about, and international. Like international,
Sure.
people know those cases. Um, oh my gosh, what's her name? Amanda. It'll come to me in a minute. I know someone's screaming it at me. Amanda Knox, who her roommate in Italy was
Oh,
murdered, like
yeah.
that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and she was
yeah.
from here. She actually has a podcast herself and
Hmm.
is quite lovely. Because she's been like multiple times, like she didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's like by the court. She didn't.
Right.
It. So, anyways, but she is also one that was tried in the court of public opinion in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
not even here. So it happens everywhere. This was another place, kind of where one of the first trial by media situations
Mm-hmm.
occurred. Um, the press depicted John Colt as a former professional riverboat gambler who had public affairs with women, a common law wife, and who committed perjury to enlist in and quit the Marines. I told you that would come back.
Mm-hmm.
And they did figure out that he did lie, because clearly they're like, if Samuel Colt's your brother, like,
That's you.
then your dad is Christopher Colt, not George Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
So they ended up figuring all of that out, and all of it came out. So, as everyone can probably guess, the other salacious news stories that came out were surrounding the fact that John was the brother of the famous Samuel Colt.
Mm-hmm.
The other stories talked about the fact that John cohabitated with a unmarried pregnant woman, Caroline Henshaw.
I didn't know that she was with child.
I put in parentheses, gasp. Coverage appeared in New York papers such as our always favorite bipedal tailless newspaper, The Sun. And I told you P.T. Barnum would be back.
Mm-hmm.
The Sun incorrectly, because
They are never incorrect in their reportings.
they incorrectly labeled a photo of P.T. Barnum that they purchased from the Albany Evening Atlas as a picture of Samuel Adams.
Oh, no.
And I put, honestly, can we really expect that much out of the Sun at this point?
Oh, I bet he was so mad.
Because keep in mind, too, the Sun was the one that originally posted, like, came out saying that Mary Rogers was missing, and she wasn't missing. And so people were saying that the Sun was in on it and that it was a fraud. And yeah, so
they don't have a good track record.
No, they don't. Then the religious magazines started, such as the Catholic Herald, the Evangelical Magazine, the Episcopal Recorder, and Gospel Advocate. They all used the story to demonstrate such problems as the, quote, lack of morality in the home, aka living with someone when you aren't married to them. And I put double gasp, and the woman being pregnant. Triple gasp. Because, all right. Because, someone's murdered, but we're going to shame a woman in the process of doing it. Because, why not? People are garbage. It's been a couple episodes. Throughout the trial, John was repeatedly accused of being a cold-blooded murderer, all in quotes, by the New York press.
Well, I mean, they had a lot of ammunition behind them.
Oh, it wasn't good. The October 30th issue of the Weekly Tribune quoted James Colt. Keep in mind, James was the one that mailed that letter for him. He was the other brother. He is the brother who mailed the Marine letter, and he was also practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri at this time. And the Weekly Tribune quoted the brother as saying, quote, "Insanity is hereditary in our family."
Oh, well, that was helping all of them?
Alluding to his sister. Like, but, and again, what garbage do you have to be to associate that with like your family having insanity? Like, that's not what happened. I mean, I get it, but still, like, whatever. So,
not saying I agree with him, but
I know. Yeah, at that time, I understand, but still, like, garbage. James Gordon Bennett, our friend and editor of the New York Herald.
Not Junior.
No, not Junior, the dad. He wrote lengthy editorials about Colt's, quote, confidence, assurance, and arrogance. And that his, quote, limitless potential had been undermined by a want of moral and religious culture. Okay. The major exception in all of this was the Knickerbocker, in which Lewis Gaylord Clark, not that one, not that Lewis Clark, he reported the murder as a, quote, misfortunate accident.
It was an accident.
Okay. No, not really. You still intend a hammer would still do some heavy damage.
It would.
I mean, not as much as a hatchet, but
it was being strangled.
We'll get into it. Hold on. We'll talk more about it in a second because we're about to get to the case. John's lawyers continually petitioned Judge Kent to forbid press coverage, but the judge refused them by saying the, quote, court had done everything to prevent the jury from being influenced from without. So essentially, like, well, you know, we've told the jury that they can't pay attention to the press, so I don't know what more you want from us. We can't tell them that they can't, like, report on it. Sorry. Okay. Halfway through the trial, Chief Prosecutor James R. Whitting alleged that Samuel Adams had been murdered with a Colt Patterson revolver.
Of course he did.
Rather than a hatchet. Whitting came to this conclusion after Dr. Gillum, he examined the body with the coroner, but he was not the actual coroner. After Dr. Gillum testified about a round hole in Samuel's skull that could not have been made by a hatchet. This is when the suggestion was made that John must have used a revolver in a premeditated act where he lured Samuel to his death. Keep in mind, no witnesses reported hearing any gunfire.
And there's not a silencer.
Well, here's this. Nevertheless, Whitting's argument was that a revolver ball fired by the power of the percussion cap alone could propel the ball with enough force to kill a man without making the noise of the exploding black powder into the cylinder. Several witnesses were called to testify against the idea, including an early ballistician named Zabrinsky, and they called Samuel Colt himself to the stand.
How uncomfortable would that be?
Samuel Colt demonstrated to the court by shooting his revolver in the courtroom and catching the fired balls in his hand, showing that such a shot could not penetrate the depth of the wound found in Samuel's skull.
That's a good brother.
Well, and he also kind of created it, so he knows exactly how it works.
Well,
like,
yeah,
you know, like,
I mean, well, exactly. But he's like, let me show you.
Yeah. So, it's just insane.
Well, but of course somebody's going to say that because, I mean, you're going to go after the big company that started to have success. I mean, of course you're going to do that.
And I told y'all last episode that this part would come, and this is the part.
She's going to make me put my hand over my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Despite several objections, Whitting had the coroner, David L. Rogers, bring Samuel's severed head and the hatchet into the courtroom to show the jury the direction and number of strikes made. John was reportedly covering his face during the demonstration. The cylindrical wound, which Whitting and Gillum thought was made by a ball fired from a revolver, was actually caused by one of the nails used by Colt to seal the crate.
I mean, guys, I'm just saying, if I was on the jury, I would have covered my face. See, that's disgusting.
They have to see it, though, too. I mean, I get it. But anyways, so Gillum conceded that the wound was actually by a nail and admitted that no foreign object, such as a ball from a revolver, was found in the victim's head.
Duh.
John admitted that he killed Samuel and planned to confess before he was arrested. He attested the entire time that he acted in self-defense. During his testimony, John said, quote, "I then sat down for I felt weak and sick. After sitting a few minutes and seeing so much blood, I think I went and looked at poor Adams, who breathed quite loud for several minutes, then threw his arms out and was silent.
Ugh.
I recollect at this time taking him by the hand, which seemed lifeless, and a horrid thrill came over me that I had killed him." I would not have used those words.
No.
I know what he
thrill.
means, but that's like
Yeah.
not a good thing.
Thrill is not a good word to use.
John reported that his first thought was to burn down the building to destroy the evidence. But as a number of people lived in the building, he reconsidered it because, quote, "it would cause more carnage." He decided instead to dispose of the body in a large packing crate, wrapping the victim in an awning and bounding it with rope. After scrubbing the floor, he threw Samuel's clothing into a nearby outdoor privy and then stopped at the Washington bathhouse on Pearl Street to wash the blood off of him. Closing arguments were made on January 23rd of 1842. The defense argued that John had acted in self-defense as Samuel had been choking him, and Colt's only means to defend himself was to grab a nearby weapon. His defense for hiding the body was temporary insanity. The prosecution countered in a 2-hour-long rebuttal that the killing was premeditated. He alluded to John's demeanor at the trial, which a lot of papers did, and a lot of people said a lot of things about how he was acting. The taking of Samuel's gold pocket watch, leaving the hatchet apparently in plain view, and that John's method of disposing the body was evidence contradicting John's claims that his actions were that of an innocent man acting in self-defense. So essentially, if he would have just gone straight to the authorities, yes, it would have been self-defense, but you tried to cover it up.
That's kind of my thought too.
Judge Kent dismissed the argument for self-defense based on John's attempted concealment and instructed the jury that since John had confessed to the murder, that they were to determine whether the charge should be murder or manslaughter. They did not really have a choice to say he was not guilty by reason of insanity. So, Judge Kent remarked on John's careless air that he demonstrated throughout the trial in the courtroom and said that his behavior was, quote, "not typical of an innocent man." The jury was disturbed by John's demeanor through the trial, agreeing with the judge that John appeared stoic, unremorseful, and callous when describing his disposal of Samuel's body.
Perhaps that was just emotional detachment so that he could actually say the words. My thoughts.
I mean, yeah. On January 24th, after deliberating for over 10 hours, the jury found John C. Colt guilty of willful murder. After exhausting all of his appeals, John was sentenced to death by hanging to take place on November 14th of 1842. Now, John asked that he be allowed to marry Caroline Henshaw on the morning of his hanging. While in prison, John lived luxuriously in his prison cell. He received daily visits from friends and family. He was smoking Cuban cigars. He slept in an actual bed instead of a mound of straw like the other prisoners.
Why?
He wore silk dressing gowns inside a sealskin overcoat for his daily walks in the prison yard. His cell contained the latest novels and a bird cage with a canary in it. And fresh flowers were brought to him every day by Caroline Henshaw. He dined on meals from local hotels such as quail on toast, game plates, and reed birds. Several attempts were made to remove him from the prison by dressing him in women's clothing, but all of these efforts were foiled.
Why did he?
I guess because his brother had money, and a lot of people were just kind of like, dude, I would have done the same thing. I don't know. But yeah, he was given many privileges
Yeah.
in So, anyways. Then a doctor was hired who claimed that he could resuscitate John from the hanging, providing the body did not remain suspended long. And he believed John's neck to be of such thickness that strangulation would be nearly impossible. That's not how that works, guys. John's friends lodged the doctor in the Shakespeare Hotel on the morning of the scheduled hanging and planned to bring the body there from the tombs for resuscitation.
I mean, that doctor was like, "Hey, y'all, watch this. I'm gonna suck these people out some money."
On the morning of November 14th, 1842, John and Caroline were married in the prison at a small ceremony conducted by Reverend Henry Anthon and witnessed by Samuel Colt and their friend, John Howard Payne. After the ceremony, and a few hours before the scheduled execution, we talked about this in the episode before, a fire broke out in the Tombs prison. After the fire was extinguished, John's body was found in his cell. Sorry, guys, bit of a trigger. He stabbed himself in the heart with a clasp knife, and it was believed that he had been smuggled the knife by a family member. His body was taken by Reverend Anthon, who had just married him that morning, and John C. Colt was buried in the churchyard of St. Mark's Church in the Bowery.
So, question. I didn't pay attention to months and such. Was she still pregnant and had not given birth yet?
We're about to get there.
Okay.
It's no shock that John's death also received press just like his trial, and there were theories that suggested that John was actually still alive. Some said that John killed another prisoner and put the prisoner in his cell and that he actually escaped during the fire. One paper said that John ran to California with his wife, and this was further encouraged by a book that came out by a former New York chief of police. A man named Samuel M. Everett claimed that he met John Colt, or a man who looked identical to him, in the Santa Clara Valley in California during 1852, and that account was published in Pearson's magazine. Harold Schechner, a researcher and author of 2 books about John Colt, dismisses all of this as, quote, an outlandish tale and a product of folklore, not fact. An article in the New York Times written during 1880 said that Caroline Henshaw was watched by private detectives for years after John's death and that no sign was ever seen of him alive. None of the speculations of John still being alive after November 14th, 1842 have proven to be true. There is, however, a man who is he's made himself a bit of a historian specifically for the Colt family. and his name is William Edwards. He wrote that Caroline Henshaw actually did marry Samuel Colt in Scotland before they came back to the U.S., and that the child she was pregnant with was actually Samuel's, not John's. A biography of Samuel Colt came out in 1953, which was based on mostly letters that went back and forth between the family. And in his biography, written by that historian, Edwards, it was claimed that John's marriage to Caroline was only a way to legitimize her son.
Well, and I figured that. So, question: Did Samuel marry?
Samuel Colt actually abandoned Caroline when they got back to the U.S. because he felt that she was not fit to be the wife of an industrialist, and divorce was still a social stigma at the time. This is when John and Caroline met and lived together in New York City. To further contribute to the idea that the child was Samuel's, the child's name was Samuel Sammy Caldwell Colt. Samuel Colt cared for Sammy financially with large allowances and paid for his tuition in the finest private schools. In correspondence with and about his namesake, Samuel Colt only referred to Sammy as specifically his nephew, but nephew was always in quotes.
Huh.
Historians have said that this was Samuel Colt's way of letting the world know that the boy was actually his own son without saying so directly. Once Samuel Colt died on January 10th of 1862, he left Sammy the equivalent of $2.5 million.
Just a little bit of money.
Samuel Colt's widow, Elizabeth Jarvis Colt, and her brother Richard Jarvis contested the inheritance. And in a probate court, Caroline's son, Sammy, produced a valid marriage license showing that Caroline and Samuel Colt were married in Scotland during 1838, and that this document made him a rightful heir to part of the Colt's estate, and most importantly, the heir to the Colt Manufacturing Company.
Oh.
He did have a wife. Her name was Elizabeth Jarvis. And they did get married soon after he returned to the U.S. after he abandoned Caroline.
Did they have kids?
I couldn't find much about it.
Okay. I was just curious.
But it wouldn't matter because Sammy would be the oldest.
Well, and it wouldn't have been an actual marriage, though, because, I mean, Caroline would have been the actual wife.
I couldn't find anything that actually said that Sammy did take over the company at all, though. I think this was kind of more of a threat than anything else of like, hey, all I'm getting is this $2.5 million.
Shut your face or I'm going to do more.
Pretty much. Like, I could go, you're coming after me for this amount of money, but based off of this piece of paper, one, your marriage wasn't legitimate, which also makes your children with Samuel Colt illegitimate. And I can also take everything.
Yeah.
So,
by the way, you have no claim.
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of this because, interestingly enough, do you know who the third president of the Colt Manufacturing Company ended up being?
Sammy's son.
Richard Jarvis, the brother of Samuel Colt's widow. The same year that Samuel Colt died, her brother took over as the president of the Colt Manufacturing Company. I only found that out because I went into the history of the Colt Manufacturing Company.
Because you had to know.
Well, because I was like, if he threatened it, why did he threaten it and it didn't happen? So, anyways, author Herman Melville made an allusion to the case in his short story, Bartleby and the Scrivener. In this story, the narrator restrains his anger toward Bartleby, his unrelenting, difficult employee, by thinking upon, quote, the tragedy of the unfortunate Adams and the still more unfortunate Colt, and how poor Colt, being dreadfully incensed by Adams, was unaware hurled into his fatal act. Herman Melville actually put that in his story regarding that. Edgar
It's
Allan
true.
Poe's short story, The Oblong Box, was published in 1844. And it tells of the shipboard transport of a corpse in a wooden box packed with salt. The story, allegedly, was inspired by John's method of disposing of Samuel's corpse, which is famously referred to as, quote, the single most macabre element of the Colt case.
I mean, it was
And-
clever.
Yeah. That is the Colt-Adams murder trial.
Wow.
Now you see why this had to be 2 episodes.
Yes. I mean, if he hadn't tried to cover it up, I don't think that things would have ended how they did.
I don't think so either. I think that if he went there and he did that, but I mean, and for you want to say this child is not Samuel's, and you would think that if you were the widow of a man, that the child would be named after your husband who died.
Mm-hmm.
But he's married after his brother?
Named after.
So his name then is Samuel
Yeah.
after your husband's brother,
But
not
your dad,
husband.
But his dad died.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I'm with you.
So why would that name, why is he named Samuel?
Unless John had told him, told her, hey, you know what? I brought so much shame on the family, and Samuel has done so much for me, for us. I don't deserve to have a legacy, but he does.
But John would have already known that the child wasn't his. So I don't think that would have been a conversation at all.
But what I'm saying is, like, if she was able to visit him and everything, even if the kid was his, and he told her, hey, and if it's a boy.
Well, if by that thinking, then why even give him the last name of Colt? Because he's still associated with it.
Because
he has the same middle name as his dad.
But he puts his brother up on such a pedestal.
I mean, I get it. I'm just saying that if you're trying to scoot it under the rug that this kid is not your husband's brother's, I would think that you would try and hide it a little bit better than literally naming the kid Samuel.
Well,
you could have made it like a middle name. You could have
yeah.
done a lot of different things, but
But
you were like,
maybe-
nope, right after him.
But I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm just saying maybe John like pushed for it and was like, I want you to
I don't
name
think
this.
John cared.
Yeah.
I don't think he cared at all about it. There's not too much. There's more mention of Samuel and Caroline's relationship than there is John and Caroline's. And so I think that the entire premise of him living with Caroline was so that she was not a single unmarried pregnant woman. She was at least living with someone.
Yeah.
And John was only doing this as a favor to his brother.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And so I don't think
she
John
had
cared.
The Colt name, and so the child had the Colt
Yep.
name. I see that.
So
absolutely.
I don't know. But either way, we have a website
We do.
where you can find any and all ONUC information you are looking for. It is onenationundercrime.com. We are One Nation Under Crime on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at ONUC Pod on Twitter. If you love our podcast as much as we do, please follow us, recommend us to all of your friends and family. As we have mentioned before, please go on to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review, 5 stars only, please. And if you're not a patron, Get on it, guys.
I mean, what's stopping you?
You could have had this episode a whole week early.
Don't you
Just
feel
saying.
badly that
Just
you
saying.
didn't?
You could have had it. But otherwise, we still love you. And we appreciate you guys listening to this week's episode of One Nation Under Crime.
And all the weeks.
All of them. We will see you here, same time,
Different crime.
next week. And remember, there isn't always liberty and justice for all.
Nope.
Especially if you're the actual widow to Samuel Colt.
Well, and if you're the victim and they bring your head into the courtroom.
That's true, too.
Blech.
That's true. Goodbye.